The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope it's working.
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
very
see
good.
you and okay.
Yes. Okay,
Hope
so thank you very much. I think the opening words are very pertinent. We really face this existential challenge to decarbonize our homes, obviously decarbonize our societies, but it makes the fact that we have this housing affordability crisis makes it much more complex in the built environment in the residential sector. Because we have to make sure that the decarbonization processes don't actually exacerbate or make the affordability crisis even worse. So it's really this reconciliation that's extremely challenging. And I must say, because we still have such strong speculation in the sector, so many countries leaving housing exclusively to market forces, hoping that the market will solve the problem, we see that this is not leading us in the right direction. So the decarbonization in housing has to take many different paths. I mean, if we look at it in a holistic way, we also link to mobility. So how much carbon is actually emitted for people to travel from their home to their work and to services. We have to look at the materials, so the embodied carbon when we are constructing. We have to look at the use phase, so how much energy we're actually using to heat and cool. Look at also climate adaptation, how much work is needed, how much investment is needed for the climate adaptation, so resistance to heat islands, to flooding. So it's quite a, let's say, complex challenge. And let's just say, so far we're letting the market get in the way. The market is not going to allow us to adapt our housing to meet all of these challenges of decarbonization. Already we have insufficient regulation in rental markets. We have rampant exploitation, let's face it, in the rental markets around Europe. Landlords are in the powerful position. Can they really be forced to renovate in an inclusive, sustainable way? We are very far from that reality. So unless we face up to the fact that the market cannot deliver the housing and the decarbonization challenge and the housing challenge, unless the EU faces up to that, we will have an uphill struggle. And unfortunately, the EU is a body which relies extensively on the market, hopes that the market will solve most of our problems when it comes to the energy transition, when it comes to the housing crisis. And I think we can see clearly that this is not going to happen. So what I want to do today is show another way. So currently, the majority of what we see in housing is driving divisions, driving inequality, driving pollution, excluding elderly people, excluding youth, excluding families from cities where they've grown up. We can have another way. We can have housing that we can change this story. In fact, the European Commissioner said it last week at the ministerial meeting in Copenhagen. So Jørgensen, the commissioner responsible for energy and housing, gave an extremely inspiring speech, which I would encourage you to check. He said, we can change this housing story in Europe. And he was inspired by a district that has been renovated by the city of Paris, which has introduced geothermal heating and cooling in housing that is regulated, where the price is regulated, a mix of social and limited profit housing in a neighborhood in Paris. So I think he got a lot of hope from visiting that project, those homes, looking at the decarbonized heating system. And he said, we can change the story. And we in Housing Europe, we are also convinced that this story can be changed. We have the ideas, the creativity at local level. We have also projects which are successful, which can be replicated. We can really change this story with the political will and with the right governance structure. And this just brings me to the new European Bauhaus. Before I open my PowerPoint and show some of the examples, personally, really appreciated the message coming from New European Bauhaus. This message of trying to replicate indeed the original grassroots initiative, which was to make housing much more affordable for much bigger groups of people, and to innovate when it comes to materials for that aim. But the message from the New European Bauhaus was together, sustainable, and beautiful. I thought this was really a masterpiece, and unexpected. It was a completely unexpected. And for the first time, our members from all over Europe they are federations of public, cooperative and social housing. They were actually ringing me and saying, how can we get involved? We love the sound of this. Usually it's us trying to tell them, look, there's a directive coming. You need to mobilize, you need to transpose, you need to contact your government. But the New European Bauhaus was something that captured the attention, captured the imagination, particularly from Southern Europe, where they really value the aesthetics and the tradition of beautiful cities. And I think this message of beautiful, sustainable, together is exactly what we need. And particularly the word together. It's about housing. If you're homeless or having a home that is energy inefficient or inadequate, is it only your problem? I mean, it shouldn't be. Housing should be a societal problem, societal challenge. And what we really risk positive outcomes when we individualize. It's your fault you're homeless. Oh, you were very lucky because you were able to purchase multiple properties and amass a huge amount of wealth by renting them on short-term letting and not paying tax. Oh, you were very lucky, you were very clever. No, housing has to be, this together is very important. It has to be a societal challenge where we try to have housing that serves society. And yes, some of you, depending on where you live, might feel that we're very far from that. But I think there is hope. We have to have hope, and we have to base ourselves on those projects that work, just like Commissioner Jørgensen for Energy and Housing, I think, got hope from a success story on the ground. This is tangible. This is also why I really, really appreciated the New European Bauhaus, because it's not trying to send a rule, a directive from European level. It's really trying to shape a new vision based on those success stories, based on the creativity and imagination and innovation that is amazing in Europe, in our universities, in our cities, within our architects, our planners, and trying to, let's say, draw, not just send a diktat from Brussels, but to draw on all of that innovation that is there around us to create, as it's called, a movement. So we really try to support the New European Bauhaus, the spirit of the Bauhaus, by also trying to bring out those successful projects, but also then share, okay, to have more of those projects, what do we need? What type of governance frameworks, finance frameworks, what will they look like to make more of those projects? What empowerment for local authorities, for citizens, do we need to have more of those projects? And then what can the EU do? We must face it, EU has limited competence when it comes, this is a national issue. It is a vital, very important force in setting the ambition. So the 2040 decarbonisation targets that are being discussed at the moment under the Danish presidency, for instance, the energy performance of building directives to really bring our building stock to phase out the worst performing buildings by 2030. So member states have to, by the end of this year, put a plan in place, or present their plans for the building renovation plan. So you will have Stefan Moser after this, he might mention that as well. So the EU is vital in, and I think it's even more important now in these times where all of the progressive thinking is being questioned because of what's happening in the US and other countries. Everything is being questioned around the Green Deal, even gender equality, all of the ideas we took for granted are being put to question because of the power of the US narrative. So the EU has to be very strong about an inclusive Green Deal, and the frameworks on community energy production, on renewable energy, on renovation of the grid, etc., are even more crucial at this time. So it's a complex regulatory structure, but very much this leadership, obviously, coming from the EU in terms of putting the regulations on the table, guiding member states on how to implement them is crucial. Then I would just mention on the financing side, indeed, we follow very, very closely what financing potential there is from EU. Some of our members are not interested. So those with the very high countries in the high GDP, they don't really use EU finance. Others, their entire social housing system is actually relying to a large part on EU support, EU de-risking, EU subsidies, favorable long-term loans, technical assistance. So we have a real mix of what profile the EU finance has on the ground. What's crucial coming up also now is the energy, so the ETS, the emissions trading, being extended to buildings and transport. So some of our members worry that this can have a very negative effect, increasing heating and cooling bills for people who actually have no agency to change their heating system. So this is something we are obviously in constant talks with DG Ener, the main DG responsible for this, and DG Klima. But to counteract the potential negative social impact of the increasing tax on polluting heating systems, we have the Social Climate Fund, and their member states have also, I'm not sure if all of them have presented their plans, but there are plans in place to make sure that the finance generated by the extension of the emissions trading to buildings can be used to address structurally inefficiency in housing and prevent an increase in, let's say, address energy poor. So this is a big part of our work on Housing Europe, is just scanning the horizon, what finance is there, which of our members at local level can really use it, and trying to bring the actors together to make the funding flow. So these are the pillars of work. And yes, as I said, I was very happy to see that you'd chosen this new European Bauhaus. I'm curious also to hear what you are thinking about the new European Bauhaus. So I have some slides, but I feel like I've touched on the most important issues, and I wonder if you prefer to move on, or how would you like to do it? Just let me know.
If you have some slides with information, maybe you can show us, and then if there are some real numbers or something, so we can further discuss this.
Oh, so you mentioned. All right, keep it like that. You can still hear me?
Yes, and we can see the slides.
Okay. So, yes, as we said, this is the vision for decent and affordable housing in communities where everyone can reach their full potential. And this is the, let's say, we talked a lot about speculation in real estate in the housing sector, but this is, let's say, the non-speculative sector. And this you have to different degrees in different countries. You have strong housing cooperatives, very advanced in energy efficiency, sustainability, and you have 43,000 of those spread around Europe. They are maybe public housing companies, housing associations, and housing cooperatives. And let's say they are mixed in terms of their energy performance. In some countries, we have to say they're underfunded, understaffed, so it's a very weak sector. Thinking perhaps it's Portugal, it's only, say, 2% of the stock overall in the country. well, up to 6% in Porto, so we're talking small numbers, whereas in some countries up to 30%, in Austria, in Vienna, 60-70% is this limited profit or public housing. So we see that these are the federations present in the different countries. Maybe people from different countries can see the federation from their country on the screen. And this, let's say, union or grouping has been working for many years together. And a big part of the work is indeed looking at the energy transition and how we can further that. We work on different topics, so policy, research, and innovation project is a big part of our work. So the focus of today, of course, is the next frontiers and innovation, and how we are handling that in the current EU context. So, as mentioned, we have to focus on 3 issues. So not only sustainability, but also affordability and availability. And this threesome is sometimes quite challenging. If we look at the fair energy transition specifically related to the sector, we see that in France, 46% of social housing is A, B, or C, compared to 25% in the total stock. Austria, 96% of the limited profit stock, so they are limited profit cooperatives, pre-1980, already renovated, compared to 60% in this total stock. Estonia also doing well because they've managed to organize their privately owned homes that were privatized after the fall of communism. They were privatized, but they managed to establish homeowners cooperatives, which then use a Council of Europe Development Fund to have low interest rates loans for the people living in the home. So it's a system that works extremely well and is also promoted across the Baltics. We also, when we look at decarbonisation, we look at the potential of energy production. So this has taken some time to take off, let's say, but in Sweden we start to see extensive use. So Sweden, they have 20% of the homes in the public housing sector, and we start to see extensive microgrids developing in Sweden, which almost become independent from the national grid for 8 months of the year. They're aiming in some cases for 12 months. So they are, let's say, closing off part of the grid, feeding that with PV, fitting batteries, and making that resilient to any shocks to the main grid. We also see in Flanders, Belgium, they've established an energy community using the excellent framework at EU level to install solar PV for consumption in the building itself and directly reduce bills. So excellent example in Flanders, and they worked with the European Investment Bank indeed for the technical and legal assistance to set that scheme up. In France as well, we have auto-consumption, self-consumption in more and more housing. So what we see is there's still difficulty in some countries to establish energy communities. There's the cost of using the national grid is sometimes higher than it basically doesn't pay back to have an energy community because you're spending so much on the grid. But things are moving, and I think it's largely thanks to the EU side that is really pushing that forward. We see that, as I mentioned, yes, I hear something. As I mentioned, making this happen, it's a clear mix of clear regulation that are fixed in the long term. So when it comes to housing, you need a long-term, stable regulatory framework. The same comes for finance and the awareness raising. So a big part is outreach before you do a renovation, but also making sure people living in the homes learn how to use heat pumps, for instance, that they don't treat them in the same way as traditional boilers. So a lot of the energy is put into that by our members as well. So a couple of we went to a little bit more detail into an example in Austria, why does it work so well? How have they managed to already to refurbish 96% of what was built pre-1980? This is because of the fact that they have taken out the speculative push from a big part of their housing, and it's only because of this. They also have built into their system, into their social or cooperative housing system, renovation funds. So this is part of the financing, that you have this fund, because this we see a big problem in many countries. They have a social housing system with no finance for rehabilitation. Then what happens? Falls into disrepair, becomes stigmatized, and some empty units, and then you have antisocial behavior starts. So you have a downward spiral, and then a bad reputation for social housing or public housing. So it's so important to have the financing right. They also have public grants and loans at state level, sometimes, and also EU funds. Netherlands, also very inspiring. So how do they manage? Because they work based on very successful national agreements, and they've agreed to phase out E, F, and G by 2030. They have a national plan, but crucial there is the cost neutrality. So they've set up a system where, although the energy bill goes down, the rent goes up, so the total living costs remain the same. So they do have, in the broader housing sphere, many problems now in the Netherlands with affordability, particularly for I think we have quite a few students on this call, so the problems facing students to find affordable housing. However, within the non-speculative sector, they've done very well when it comes to the energy transition. France, all landlords, including social housing providers, legally obliged to renovate housing units, EFG, to be able to rent them. And you have 0% loans from the Banque de Territoire, and also white certificates. So maybe not to focus too much, I don't want to take too much of your time, but indeed the whole area of sufficiency is gaining more ground, and I think it's vital when we think of how much embodied energy is in our construction materials here in Europe. And of course, the bulk of construction globally will be in the southern hemisphere, where you will see rapid urbanization in the coming decades. But in Europe, we will have to be much more efficient in how we use the existing stock. Therefore, we have to look at change of use of integrated building renovation, brownfield development, design for disassembly and prefabrication, and bio-based materials, sustainable mobility. Here are a couple of examples. This is from an Irish non-for-profit housing association. They are building, so the non-for-profit sectors and the cooperatives are building up to 40% of the housing now in Dublin. In Ireland, I saw in a recent report. This was a very relevant example from Tua Housing, where they had a 62% reduction in whole life emissions when compared to a new build. So they converted these empty offices into homes. And there you see they reduced transport emissions. Also concrete emissions were compared, you see the equivalent 1,600 tons of CO2 equivalent, very low compared to a new build. You see more this more in-depth study on the carbon emissions. 62% reduction in whole life carbon emissions compared with a new build of a similar type. So definitely one of the clear ways we need to go is looking at how, to what extent we have empty buildings that can be converted, and clearly also where the rent then remains affordable as well. In the whole life carbon, in prefab modular retrofitting. So now we focus a lot also in the new affordable housing plan on the potential for prefabrication, industrialization of new construction, but also renovation. And there we have just one example that was paid for via an EU pilot, where the facades were constructed off-site and then fitted and can potentially be reused. Obviously a very small scale example, but nevertheless, as this typology of building is very typical in Ireland, also the UK, partly in the Netherlands, it can potentially, with the right factories, with the right procurement, be scaled up. You see the installation there. And there we have another zero carbon neighborhood renovation in Salzburg. And also, this was also under an EU project. You see that EU project funding and pilots really showing the way we need to go in the future. And this example of a positive energy district in Denmark, where the renovation took place, but also optimization of the district heating system. And we've collected all those examples. There you see some of the challenges and lessons learned from getting a successful district decarbonization plan. So it's not just about technical issues, a lot about working with the community, gaining trust, adapting your communication methods to different social groups. Okay, I will finish up there.